This message comes from Sony Pictures Classics. How do three friends who dream big stay old friends? Merrily We Roll Along from Stephen Sondheim and Maria Friedman, starring Jonathan Groff, Daniel Radcliffe, and Lindsay Mendez. Only in theaters starting December 5th.
Okay, y'all, are you a parent or have you talked to a parent recently? Well, newsflash, the parents are not okay. And I mean this in a couple of ways. Yes, there's the financial strain of raising a child right now, but I'm also talking about this underlying anxiety that seeps into every conversation I have with a parent. The question of, am I a good parent? For the next few weeks, we're going to look at the culture of parenting in America today. From the political propaganda that preys on new parents to the challenges of raising a child equipped to survive in our rapidly changing world. We're showing you how not to fall for the parent trap. New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani has been all over the headlines this past year. I want to zoom in on one aspect of his campaign that earned him heaps of support, but also more than a few critical side eyes.
The city's inability to provide childcare means that businesses often have to provide stipends for that childcare.
I'm talking about universal childcare.
Right now, the absence of universal childcare means that a family will pay around $22,500 a year, which is more money than many of them would spend if they sent that same kid to college 18 years later.
The idea of having childcare available for children as young as 6 weeks had some people feeling like Mamdani was really shaking the table. But actually, there was a time when the entire country had universal childcare. Let's go back to the 1940s, to World War II.
The U.S. needed as many women as possible to join the workforce.
That's Dr. Jessica Calarco, professor of sociology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
What they ultimately decided to do after some kicking and screaming from Congress was to use funding from the Lanham Act, which was essentially a defense spending bill, to fund and build public child care centers across the U.S. So essentially, this program ended at the end of World War II. You know, we could have kept these centers open. They were deeply popular, and they provided childcare and even after-school care and summer care for older kids for less than $10 per day in today's dollars. And so families liked this.
Wait, when and why did this program end?
Congress shuttered the child care centers. I mean, they didn't want to do the work of rebuilding our economy and expanding our economy to make room for women. So they told women, actually, no, it's your patriotic duty to just go back home and take care of the kids instead.
We used to use defense money to pay for nationwide childcare. So how did universal childcare become a thing that so many people feel deep discomfort about? We're going to find out with Dr. Jessica Calarco and Elliot Haspel, senior fellow at the think tank Capita.
The fundamental problem is that it takes a lot of adult humans to care for small humans, particularly if you want to do it well and if you want those adults to be well compensated and be able to take care of their own families. It's not so much that childcare is expensive because there are these childcare owners running around and going to, their private island. It's expensive because some services are expensive to provide. You just need a lot of adults. So you start thinking you just can't get those economies of scale. You can't innovate around that. You just need well-trained, well-compensated educators caring for and shepherding the brain development of these very young children. And we can't do that on the cheap, which is what we've been trying to do for a very long time.
In the U.S., we really treat, as Elliot was saying, markets as the solution to so many of our problems. But childcare doesn't work as a market good for all of the reasons that Elliot outlined. We can't simultaneously have childcare be paid enough to avoid worker shortages, affordable enough for everyone who needs it, and high enough in quality that people are willing to pay for care. And so that market failure makes childcare essentially a hot potato. No one has any incentive to do that work, and everyone has an incentive to dump that work downstream onto others who are more vulnerable than they are. From policymakers onto families, from fathers onto mothers in many cases, and not even just to mothers, but from mothers in more privileged positions onto paid care providers.
Hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. I think it's pretty fair to say that most Americans are concerned about the cost of childcare, especially given that the cost of childcare, to borrow a phrase from the U.S. Department of Labor blog, is, quote, an almost prohibitive expense. That's how they put it, okay? And despite all this, universal childcare wasn't a part of either major party candidate's platform in the 2024 presidential election, even though 73% of American voters think they actually support the idea of universal childcare. So if this is something that many Americans want and maybe even need, right? Why does it seem like such a political afterthought?
So here's the problem with the poll numbers is that childcare is one of those issues that polls really well in a vacuum. And the second you ask voters to prioritize issues that they want their elected officials to work on, it plummets right to the bottom. And now there are a couple of reasons for that. The number of parents with young children in the electorate is dwarfed by non-parents of young children in the electorate. And so the direct constituency is relatively small. The second problem that you have is that those of us working on this issue, we haven't drawn those bright lines to say, actually, whether or not you have kids, you need a strong childcare system. The other challenge that I think we haven't really talked about yet is like, what exactly do we mean by childcare? There's just different ideas of what kinds of care you want. Some parents definitely want their kids in more of like a licensed formal center. Some want them in a regulated program that's like out of someone's home. Some really, really want a grandparent or a neighbor or an aunt or an uncle taking care of them. And plenty of them want to take care of the children themselves, particularly when they're young. Traditionally, a lot of this conversation has sounded like, to voters, I think, government-run childcare.
So Elliot was talking about how if you ask parents what they want in terms of childcare, there's this big diversity of opinions about what childcare should look like. And I think one of the questions that we have to be asking is why aren't more parents on board with the idea of licensed center-based childcare? Most parents, at least, are perfectly fine with the idea of sending their children to a formal public school building. But the idea of sending kids to a childcare center has a lot of hesitation around it. There's some history to this in the sense that there was a literal satanic panic that was drummed up by conservative policymakers, conservative media pundits who took this one kind of early case out of California, a mother who accused her son's childcare provider of subjecting children to satanic rituals, flushing them down toilets into secret basements, making them fly. And this actually turned into a court trial. And it became this national media sensation that affected the rhetoric around childcare centers for years. It sowed this deep distrust of formal childcare providers in ways that are still affecting parents to this day. If you ask parents, tell me about your perceptions of childcare, they'll often say, like childcare centers, they'll often say, well, I've heard these horror stories. And if you kind of dig a little deeper, most of them actually don't know of anyone personally who's had a horror story. They've heard of someone who's heard of someone who's heard of someone who's had a horror story. And so this early fear-mongering, which really came up around a time in our history when women were returning to the workforce or joining the workforce in historically large numbers, this was an effort to both discourage women from doing that and an effort to vilify working single mothers who needed childcare or choosing to send their kids to childcare if they had a partner and were able to stay home full time.
I'm glad you brought that up because there's two major fears I think that we need to address when talking about the anxiety that some people have around universal childcare, and more specifically, as you mentioned, Jessica, these regulated childcare centers, or what many people might colloquially call daycare. But I think that there's also this fear of the government having a say in raising their child that some people feel.
Yeah.
Like, can we break that kind of cultural fear down as well?
Yeah. There was this interesting moment back in 1971, and basically there was a bill that was passed by both sides of Congress, bipartisan. It was called the Comprehensive Child Development Act. It would have started to create a nationally funded, locally run network of childcare centers. That's all it would have done. But he basically concedes to Pat Buchanan, his arch conservative advisor, to veto this bill and lets Buchanan write the veto statement. And it is incredibly strong. Nixon says that to do this would be to commit the moral authority of the federal government over that of the family. It would have been nothing but create a network of voluntary childcare centers. Let's be clear. But that was the rhetoric. And it was very intentional. There is this deep and very intentionally sort of cultivated cultural idea that the government getting near the family is actually a problem, as opposed to the government should come alongside, support the family, support parents in raising their kids the way that they want to raise them and living the life that they want to live. And so I think we're still very much living with that legacy of the 70s, of the 80s, Jessica was just talking about.
I think it's important to add, too, to what Elliot is saying, that a lot of that concerted effort to kill that sucker came specifically from the Christian right. In the sense that the kind of oppositional culture around childcare, around government involvement in childcare, came from the way that conservative Christian organizations were trying very actively at the time to shape what parenting looked like in ways that prioritized this sort of traditional, quote unquote, traditional breadwinner homemaker kind of relationship with mom at home and dad in the workforce. And so this notion of the government intervening into family life at this stage of childhood was seen as particularly threatening from a conservative Christian perspective in ways that not only influenced Nixon, but also went on to have continued to shape the kinds of policies that we have around families and kids in the U.S.
There's another piece in here that I've been thinking about a lot. Another stat. A Pew Research poll from 2024 found that 55% of American adults think that children with two parents are better off when one parent stays home to focus on the family. Something I'm curious is like, how does this belief that like one parent being at home is better for the children, how does that affect the way that we support or don't support universal childcare as a concept? And also, what would need to happen structurally for one parent in a two-parent household to realistically stay home these days while still keeping the family financially afloat?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a tricky issue in the sense that, on the one hand, a lot of this perception that children do need a parent at home, comes from this fear that we have around daycare, around childcare centers, that there's this perception that, mothers are the only safe caregivers for their children, particularly in these early vulnerable ages. And in some of my own research, I find that, stay-at-home moms are incredibly isolated, incredibly exhausted, incredibly overstretched because so much falls on them. And so even if they see this as the ideal for their children, it doesn't make it easy for them as parents, and that they're often in a better place if they have at least part-time support with childcare. So I think it doesn't necessarily just have to be working for pay versus staying home full time, that there's ways to kind of expand our array of options that can give parents the flexibility, both on the one hand, to be home if they want to be, or to spend at least more time with their children when they're younger, while also acknowledging that the kinds of situations that we have right now, I mean, so stay-at-home moms in this country, we tend to think of them as this sort of like privileged, boozy Tuesday brunch kind of crowd. But the reality is very different. This is not a highly privileged population for the most part, and many of them were pushed out of the workforce and into stay-at-home motherhood because of the high costs of childcare. And so I think we have to be mindful about this disconnect between who actually wants to work, who is able to work, and how the complete lack of childcare options can also make it seem like having a parent stay home is the best option, when changing the policy structure, changing what was available to families could actually make working for pay and sending kids to childcare seem like a more viable option instead.
Coming up,
having children is becoming a luxury good. If you want to have a strong community, strong families, a strong nation, you need a strong childcare system.
Stay with us.
This message comes from GiveWell. When you give to a nonprofit, how do you measure success? What is the real impact on people's lives? GiveWell researches the highest impact opportunities around the world. Over 150,000 donors have confidently used GiveWell's research, collectively saving an estimated 300,000 lives. Make a tax-deductible donation at givewell.org. First-time donors can have their donation matched up to $100 as long as matching funds last. Select Podcast and NPR at checkout.
This message comes from Michelin. More than a tire company, Michelin is an innovation company. From connected mobility to clean materials, and now taking on one of the toughest mobility challenges, space. Developing an airless wheel for space exploration, designed to withstand the extreme conditions at the moon's south pole. Michelin isn't just making exceptional tires, they're helping build a better future. Motion for life. More at michelinman.com/y-michelin/innovation. This message comes from Schwab. Everyone has moments when they could have done better, like cutting their own hair or forgetting sunscreen, so now you look like a tomato. Same goes for where you invest. Level up and invest smarter with Schwab. Get market insights, education, and human help when you need it. Learn more at schwab.com.
This message comes from Mint Mobile. Starting at $15 a month, make the switch at mintmobile.com/switch. $45 upfront payment for 3 months. 5 gigabyte plan equivalent to $15 a month. Taxes and fees extra. First 3 months only. See terms.
One of the things I'm very mindful of with this conversation is that the role that our lack of childcare plays in reinforcing gender pay gaps, for that disadvantage women in very systematic ways, in the sense that if you know that you are not going to be able to find childcare or are going to struggle to find childcare when your kids are young, or that you want to stay home when your kids are little, but you don't think you're going to have access to enough paid family leave, this is part of why women end up choosing fields like nursing, fields like teaching, fields like childcare and social work, where the demand for workers is so high that women in those fields know that even if they take a year or two off, there's always going to be a job for them. And so this is a place where if we do want to pursue policies that make it easier for women to stay home, or parents in general, oftentimes that's going to be women, to stay home when their children are young, how do we invest more in the kinds of careers that are done by women to make sure that those jobs are paid well enough, that they're not having to choose between being at home with my kid when they're little and being able to have enough money that if my current relationship breaks down, I won't be able to, support my child on my own. And this is a place where investing more in public education, investing in universal health care, investing more in our social infrastructure so that we can pay social workers and other government employees more, that these are places where we can actually do a lot of good to support women and actually make those choices more viable early on too.
I imagine, there's going to be people listening to this episode who, like myself, do not have children. Yeah. Or they're like, my kids are grown. I don't care. Or they're like, I don't care. I'm never having kids. Yeah. Why does this conversation, why does this affect everybody?
I mean, I think one way that underinvesting in childcare hurts all of us is by pushing more families into poverty and putting more strain on other parts of the social safety net. When families can't find or afford childcare, it is often moms who end up dropping out of the workforce or working for pay part-time. Some of the moms that I've talked to are even working split shifts where they're home with the kids all day and then working an overnight shift, and they are, exhausted, and these jobs are not high paid in most cases. And so essentially, this underinvestment in childcare is making it harder for families to make ends meet financially in ways that are pushing them onto Medicaid, pushing them onto food stamps, pushing them into welfare programs that are helping to support them in the short term if they're not able to get those needs met, but also doing so in ways that just drive up the costs elsewhere. So it's we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, as the saying goes, in the sense that we're refusing to invest in childcare and just pushing the costs elsewhere.
The stakes are high. Childcare is forcing far too many. I think it gets at our national soul, quite frankly. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic with that. Mm-hmm. This is the matter of a family being able to stay in a community in which they are rooted, be part of a faith community, be part of a civic association, part of the sports leagues. This is about families being able to have the number of children that they want. The number of people I've talked to who has told me I would have another child with me right now if it wasn't for the cost of childcare. Like, having children is becoming a luxury good. If you want to have a strong community, strong families, a strong nation, you need a strong childcare system.
I think we have to be very mindful of how Trump's deportation policies are threatening to undermine the progress that has already been made on childcare. There was a report that came out in July of 2025 from the Economic Policy Institute that found that if Trump is able to carry out his full immigration agenda, those deportations will end up eliminating 500,000 childcare jobs in the U.S. Immigrant women currently play an outsized role in the childcare workforce, that trickle down of the way that we kind of push care further and further downward onto those who are most vulnerable and marginalized. Right now, the buck really stops with migrant women. They are the backbone of our care economy. And right now, those deportations are threatening to fully destabilize, the gains that have been made by eliminating, a huge portion of the base of the childcare workforce in the U.S.
I have to say, y'all have really educated me today. So thank you both so much. I really appreciate this conversation.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you so much.
That was Professor of Sociology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Dr. Jessica Calarco, and Elliot Haspel, Senior Fellow at the think tank Capita. So you all know I love hearing from you. And over the past few weeks, some of you have left the sweetest notes for me in the comments and reviews. One of y'all wrote, This is my favorite podcast produced by NPR. Me too. Another wrote, thanks for enriching my life. You guys, I'm blushing. And if any of those comments resonate with you, I would love, love, love it if you rated and reviewed this show wherever you're listening. It helps other people find the show, and that means this community we're building will get even bigger. So join the team. Rate and review this show right now. And thank you. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Corey Antonio Rose.
This episode was edited by
Nina Patak.
Our supervising producer is
Barton Girdwood.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
This message comes from Vital Farms, who works with small American farms to bring you pasture-raised eggs. Farmer Tanner Pace describes what makes a pasture-raised egg unique.
Before we first started with Vital Farms, I thought, an egg's an egg, not a big deal, but it's hard for me to even eat an egg that's not a Vital Farm egg. Now, Vital Farms eggs are usually brown to lighter brown in color. And when you crack a pasture-raised egg, you have to hit it harder than what a person thinks just because the shell quality is so good. And basically when that egg cracks in the skillet or bowl, that yolk is almost kind of an orange shade. And that is part of what I love about a Vital egg is just the shade of yolk. I love pasture-raised eggs because you can see the work and the pride that the farmers have and have put into these eggs.
To learn more about how Vital Farms farmers care for their hens, visit vitalfarms.com.
This message is sponsored by DSW, the birthplace of the humble brag. Full of all kinds of shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. And when there are never-ending options for every style, mood, occasion, and budget, there is unlimited freedom to play. And that's something to brag about. So go ahead, stock up on fresh sneakers from your favorite brands. Or try those boots you always secretly knew you could pull off. Find the shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. DSW, let them surprise you.